Good morning from West Mount Airy, Philadelphia. I'm Jessica Dore, and I'm going to be reading the Tarot offering for July 2019 this morning. The Tarot offering is something that I've been doing for a couple of years now. I pull 6 cards toward the end of a month and write something about them sort of for the month ahead. And I send that out to my email list, usually around the end of the month or right at the beginning of the month, depending on my work schedule. And then usually about a week later, I post it on my website. And something that I just started doing a few months ago was recording the offering by request of a friend of mine, a painter who really likes the offerings, but was struggling really wanted to listen to them while he was working and painting, and was like, you should make an audio recording of this so that I can listen while I'm working, and also so that I can look at the image while I'm listening to the words rather than have to toggle back and forth between the image and the words. So I thought that's a great idea for people who need an audio version or prefer an audio version to a written one. And I've been doing it since, and I really enjoy it because I get to add in a little bit of embellishment and some extra stories and things like that. So I'm going to basically read the text, but I'm going to add things in. I'll do my best to describe what the images are, or at least the most relevant symbols in the images for each of the cards that I'm talking about. And the cards that were pulled for July were the Chariot, the Moon, the Two of Swords, the Eight of Swords, the Five of Wands, and the Hermit. So most of us are so used to engaging with the world through the exertion of will that we feel lost and disoriented when we aren't able to bend life to our liking. I'm referring to the Chariot here, which is traditionally interpreted as a card about willpower, the exertion of willpower, and achievement and success, sort of in the external realm. Willpower is really useful when there's an external obstacle to overcome with a relatively clear path forward and a level of malleability to the circumstances. I remember being in a therapy group one time, listening to a therapist I was observing as a graduate student, and the therapist was saying, we're really good at problem solving, our brains are really good at problem solving. They've evolved to do that, and that works really well in the external world. But where it becomes more challenging or less useful, or even like a trap, is when we try to apply the problem solving brain to our internal life. Have you ever tried using willpower to get over a breakup, or to make anger go away, or to forgive someone, to feel less anxious? When we apply it to internal challenges, willpower doesn't really work. It's not helpful. And in some cases, it's even a liability. What I'm referring to here is things like addiction, compulsive behavior, where in efforts to control our internal experience, our emotional life, we use behaviors to try to change, the emotions that we're feeling, to numb them, to make them go away, to avoid them, to only have the emotions that we like and to not have the emotions that we don't like. That's an example of trying to use willpower on the internal life. It really doesn't, it's not helpful. Willpower is best for times when it's clear where you're going and what you need to do to get there. And I'm kind of touching a little bit on the illustration, Pamela Coleman Smith's illustration in the Rider-Waite deck of the Chariot, which has a yellow background. The yellow background is symbolizing daytime, psychic daytime, clear vision, the absence of mystery, knowing who you are, where you're going, all of that kind of stuff. No confusion. Willpower is best for those times when it's clear where you're going, what you need to do to get there. Where willpower is significantly less functional, less useful, is when night falls in the psyche, when we feel lost or exiled, cast into a metaphorical desert or sea, without knowing where to go, wandering without a map, without a compass or a constellation in the sky to look to. It's cloudy. You can't even see the stars to guide you. In a culture that worships at the altar of knowledge as power, confusion is generally devalued. It's considered a condition to be remedied and rid of, and preferably with a quickness. A reflection of this collective bias toward knowing, people who seek counsel through the tarot tend to fear and reject the moon card because it appears to be about the exact opposite of what they think they need, which is answers. People come to tarot readers because they want answers. And then the moon pops up. The moon, a symbol of psychic nighttime. And kind of like the way that what we see at night becomes obscured without the light of day, without the sun to sort of show us what's there clearly. And honestly, what use could a symbol of confusion be to those who are confused? One evening over tapas and Grenache, one of my therapy mentors told me how you can stimulate a sense of confusion in clients by relating to them in a way that they're not expecting, or asking the sort of well-crafted question that challenges their mode of being. So he was trying to teach me about the therapeutic value of confusion in sessions. And this might sound cruel or unusual to someone unable to make space for the possibility that confusion can be useful. But bear with me, I'm gonna talk all about the therapeutic value of confusion here, and why stimulating confusion in clients, or even just being in moments of confusion with yourself, can be incredibly useful. Like in the therapeutic context, when a stuck person becomes confused, the path that they've been walking vanishes before their eyes, and they're forced to forge a new way. And that's really what we want in therapy, for example. We want people to get unstuck a lot of times. With tarot readings, I want to help people get unstuck. I want them to find new ways other than kind of like the things that they've been leaning on, the narratives, the stories, the ideas, the beliefs that don't seem to be serving them anymore. So this idea of confusion as something that could have value was really fascinating to me. And it made me wonder whether we could learn to exalt confusion as a kind of crucible rather than a thing to be fixed. Maybe confusion is when you get to work on your ancient and atrophied modes of seeing, moving, and knowing. Maybe if you sit with mystery, new ways of navigating emerge, ways that are more wild and instinctual, intuitive, and rooted in higher states of consciousness. Here I'm again referring to the moon card and some of the symbols, ways of navigating that are more wild and instinctual. I'm referring to the wolves and the crawfish in Pamela Coleman Smith's illustration. Ways of navigating that are more intuitive. I'm referring to the moon, which is often seen as a symbol of intuition, and rooted in higher states of consciousness. Here I'm referring to the sun, which is in the moon card. It looks like it's not, but actually in that illustration, the sun is there. It's just eclipsed by the moon. It's actually daytime in the card. It's just that the moon is covering the sun. It's a very fascinating illustration with a lot of kind of meaning that you can extract from it if you sit with it. So maybe times of confusion are like these perfectly designed psychic situations that let us call on parts of ourselves that we wouldn't otherwise use. So after this dinner, I couldn't help but do more research into the healing properties of confusion. As it turns out, healers and teachers have been using confusion as a tool since time out of mind. Dating back to Zen koans, these ancient riddles used by Zen Buddhists in meditation, going back centuries. These are designed to help people better understand the nature of reality by puzzling them, revealing the limitations of knowing with the analytic mind. Here's one that I picked out that I like. When both hands are clapped, a sound is produced. Listen to the sound of one hand clapping. This is a Zen koan, designed to help people better understand the nature of reality by puzzling them. revealing the limitations of knowing with the analytic mind or with the verbal mind. I love that. A classroom study that was widely written about found that when teachers stimulated states of confusion in their students, the students learned more. And then in the field of mental health, psychiatrist Milton Erickson taught confusion techniques to hypnotherapists who learned to use disorientation in therapy to help patients change. So this is like really important, I think, for us to recognize that there's real value to being confused. And so when we're confused, how do we acknowledge and tap that value? To know something for sure is to build a psychic wall against anything that might challenge it. Here I'm referring to the Eight of Swords, which shows a person that is sort of like tied up and with a blindfold on, and they're surrounded by 8 swords, and they're like stuck in this marsh looking place. To know something for sure is to build a psychic wall against anything that might challenge it. Here you literally see in the image a wall of swords. The swords in tarot represent the intellect and knowing with the analytic mind. So, for instance, if I assume that certain feelings are dangerous, if I have a belief and I know that certain feelings are dangerous and I don't question that belief, this is going to keep me from doing anything that might trigger those feelings because I'm believing that they're dangerous. Even though the truth is that feelings themselves aren't dangerous at all. Of course, it's in the elaborate ways in which we avoid and reject them that damage is done. So that's an example of how like knowing something builds a wall, blocks us from experiencing things. Another example would be a person who believes they're terrible at math might avoid any course of study that requires them to do it. But what if their contributions to those fields could change the world? What if they bar themselves from going into a field of study that their perspective is desperately needed in because they believe that they're not good at math? That knowing that I'm not good at math, that knowing is limiting them. It's building a psychic wall against them and something that might debunk that belief. Knowing things is limiting. We don't think about knowing things as limiting. We think about it generally as giving us power. People always say, well, I'd rather know than not know. Knowledge is power. The more you know, if you really think about it, there's so many little phrases and things that we use that really lift up knowledge as, being the ultimate, and confusion as being the thing you want to, get as far away from as possible. So knowing things is limiting. Not knowing, on the other hand, makes life broad and full of potential. This is what I'm kind of making as a suggestion. When our psychic defenses drop, doorways that challenge our concept of what a door even looks like appear and fly open, daring us to trust that we know a portal when we see one. When we are disoriented, all we can do is grab for a foothold or solid edge to hold on to. We don't have the energy to defend against our own growth. Here I'm talking about the Two of Swords, which I've written about in the past as being a card about ambivalence around recovery and growth and healing. It shows a person sitting in front of a body of water with 2 swords held up like across their chest. So it's like protecting oneself with intellectual knowledge on one hand, creating a buffer between experience and sort of like heart-centered living by creating beliefs and knowing things. Because of course, as soon as we know something to be true, we've created a wall, a psychic wall against anything that challenges it. But the other thing about this card as being sort of about like defending against growth, it's like there's always going to be a part of us that's going to be resistant to change, even if that change is for the best, for the better, because we're scared of change. We've evolved to be afraid of change. And so when we're disoriented, like all we have the energy to do is like find a foothold, just like find our footing, right? We don't have the energy to be defending against our own growth. This is beautiful. This is so important to bring those defenses down. Last week I was in Dorchester in Boston teaching a tarot reading workshop, and we were talking about the moon card. In the workshop I share therapeutic interpretations of the major arcana, and I was talking about the moon as being about confusion and the therapeutic value of confusion, and someone in the group shared a line from a short poem by Wendell Berry called Our Real Work. And I'm going to read those lines because I think they're so relevant and beautiful. It may be that when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work, and that when we no longer know which way to go, we've come to our real journey. And that's the end of the lines from the poem. When the things we take for granted stop making sense, we must abandon our stiff wooden ships for tiny rubber life rafts and set sail on a sea that we don't feel ready for in search of a more sustainable and versatile vessel. Confusion rips away facets of our identities that we may have clung to for comfort, but that only know how to do the same stuff that doesn't work. Like that stiff wooden ship, right? It's rigid, it's inflexible, it can't move in the ways that you might need it to move in certain parts of the ocean. Or like when overused muscles become injured or non-functional, we're forced to engage muscles that have dwindled and atrophied. You know, these other parts of these other like navigation abilities that we have that I was talking about earlier, instinct, higher states of consciousness, intuition. When overused muscles become injured or non-functional, we're forced to engage those that have dwindled and atrophied. So I really went in this month on the value of confusion, wanting to kind of lift it up and present an alternative perspective on confusion that might feel soothing to people who feel confused or who are currently in a time of confusion. But I also want to say that we're a member of a species that has evolved to fear uncertainty and confusion. Our disdain for the unknown is an ancient survival tactic, that served a function at one time. Our ancestors who didn't fear confusion may not have survived at the same rates as those who did, because being certain of things was safer for survival in times when life was sort of like more precarious. But this disdain for the unknown as an ancient survival tactic, it might not be needed anymore in modern times as much. So but that doesn't mean that it goes away, right? Our brains don't evolve as quickly as society changes. So we have these like ancient brains in modern times, which is quite a dilemma in many ways. But we can acknowledge the therapeutic value of confusion while also recognizing that to embrace it is to go against our grain. Our dislike for confusion is sort of like sewn into the fabric of our identity, of our DNA as humans. We're probably not going to like moments of confusion as much as we might know that there's value in them. So we do need tools to get through them. And this is where I wanted to share something where I'm going to talk about the other two cards, the Five of Wands and the Hermit. There's a model of psychotherapy called internal family systems, or IFS, which approaches people with the assumption that we're each made up of a diverse internal family of psychological parts, each with unique wants and needs, as opposed to sort of this idea that we're like a unified self and like we can kind of clearly define who we are. It's one thing. It's not ever in conflict. all that kind of stuff. So the internal family of psychological parts, each of these parts, they have unique wants and needs. Sometimes the parts are in agreement, sometimes they're in conflict. So here I'm referring to the Five of Wands, which shows 5 people with each with a wand, and they're like waving the wands in the air, and it kind of looks like there's no really like cohesion to it. It's just wands flying in all directions, representing this internal family when some of the parts are not in agreement with one another. So confusion is a symptom of parts in conflict. One part wants one thing, another part wants another thing, a third part might want something else, and there you have confusion. I'm lost. I don't know which is the right way to go. In a time like this, you might find yourself toggling between options from one moment to the next. No sooner than you've made a decision, another part pops up with a compelling case for this other option, and you just want to like lie down and take a nap. So in times like these, I wanted to share a visualization practice for finding clarity that I think can be really helpful. And this practice comes from the IFS model. So here it is. It's pretty short. All of the parts of you that are conflicted, chattering, pulling, pushing, vying for the position of leadership in the psychic realm, climb a mountain in your mind's eye and leave them all at the trailhead. Go up and up and up until their voices become mumbled, then quiet, then silent, and you can no longer hear them. Keep climbing up. When you reach the summit of this mountain, this psychic mountain, what are you left holding? What is your truth? Hold that truth in your awareness. Here I'm referring to the hermit who is standing on top of this mountain. What is your truth? Hold that in your awareness. Feel it. Say it out loud. Stay as long as you need to on the top of this mountain to get to know the essence of this truth. Whenever you're ready, take that truth and carry it down the mountain with you. Bring it back to the parts. You can let them all know. Here's the truth. Here's my truth. And hold that truth lightly. This might be the key. If you get confused again, that means you're on the path. So this concludes the July 2019 tarot offering. Thank you so much for listening. You're probably accessing this on my website, but if you're not, then you can go to my website for more information about me and my work and my writing. That's jessicadore.com. I'm on Twitter and Instagram as well. My handles on both of those are the Jessica Dore. And thank you so much for listening, and have a good and maybe confusing and maybe clear and many other things July.